Hi, my name is Ben King. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Philadelphia area. And today we're going to be talking about how to reconnect with your partner, how to figure out if you're disconnected, and how to get back into a connected place. So first, the overview. Why is this important to talk about? What does it mean to be disconnected? What leads us to disconnect? What does it mean to be connected? What leads us to connect? How can we reconnect? And highlights, takeaways of the video. All right, so first, why is this important to talk about? So there are a lot of problems that we face in relationships, but most of them are obvious. Most of them are not going to be subtle. This is one of the maybe few that are very subtle. In most problems, there's a very obvious feeling. So if the other person did or said something that made me upset, it's very clear, it's very obvious to me. Whereas when there's a disconnect, that could be something that could go on for weeks, months, sometimes years, and it doesn't have to seem like a big problem if we're not fighting all the time. Another reason is instead of it being weeks or months and not really recognizing that there is that disconnect, this is important to talk about so that you can catch it, so that you can be ahead of it, so that if there's a few days in a row where you're feeling disconnected, you can recognize it and then have something to do about it. And then last, it becomes much more difficult to connect the longer that you are disconnected. So metaphorically, imagine that the two of you are on your own separate rafts in the ocean. If you're disconnected for a few days, that's not necessarily a big problem. The two of you are still pretty close to each other, so it doesn't take a lot of effort to be able to get back to each other. But if you're disconnected for weeks or months, imagine being miles and miles away from each other on your rafts. It's going to take a hell of a lot of effort to just get back to baseline, just to get back where you were before. So those are the reasons why it's important, so that you can catch it ahead of time. So what does it mean to be disconnected? So at its core, it often feels like you're not noticing each other. So you're not seeing each other. There isn't a lot of interest that the two of you have or feel with each other. And so again, it's subtle because it might not be a remarkably bad feeling. It's more of a lack of a good feeling. And especially if there aren't a lot of fights between the two of you, that can really make it seem like things are okay. We're kind of just coasting along and there's no problem with that. But the trouble is when there are rarely times where you connect, where you engage with each other. That's a really telltale sign of being disconnected. And one important part about the theme of being disconnected, it's never about who's at fault, who's to blame for the disconnect, because it's almost always unintentionally maintained by both partners, that both of us are doing things unwittingly that is continuing that disconnect, that's creating that disconnect. And so the important part is to notice it. The important part is just to notice we have a disconnect and then go from there. And so what leads us to disconnect? So first and most obviously, arguments and negative interactions can easily cause this. If the other person is hurting me, I'm naturally just going to pull away from them. It's metaphorically like if I touch a hot stove, I'm going to learn, okay, I did this. I touched the hot stove. It really hurt. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to back away from the stove. And again, it might seem silly, but it's very similar when we're in a relationship, that if you start to be a person that I associate pain and hurt with, I'm just naturally going to start to disengage. It's often not a conscious thing that we do. It's often just naturally, organically happening. It could be prioritizing other parts of life. So if I have a lot going on at work, or my work is just consistently busy, that's where most of my energy and most of my mental power are going to go to. I can easily neglect the relationship and engaging with each other at home because I had a really long day, so I don't even feel like I have the energy to be able to put in at home. Couples with children are very susceptible to this because they're often going to be in mom and dad mode and just kind of survival mode all of the time. And so that can make it really difficult to carve out relationship time when you're in mom and dad mode, when you're in these different roles for most of the day. And then not knowing how to ask for connection. And I think for a lot of people that can that can happen because it's scary to ask for connection. I mean, that's a very vulnerable thing to do, to say to the other person, hey, I've noticed recently that we haven't really been connecting. I've felt disconnected from you, and I would really love to feel more connected. I would really love for us to be more engaged. That's something that can be difficult for a lot of us to do. And so that's another part, is just not really knowing how, or not having the courage to be able to ask for that connection. And so what does it mean to be connected? Feeling connected can look many different ways, but it often feels like you're in a groove together. You're complementing each other well, and the connection you have is enhancing your life, making all of your life easier. I mean, a really good example is if you're having a tough time at work, if you come home and you feel disconnected, that can often make everything feel even more difficult. But if you come home and you're expecting a supportive partner and that's what you get, that can make all parts of our life a lot easier. And so metaphorically, it's like the two of you are dancing together and everything is completely coordinated. It's not jerky, it's not awkward, it's smooth and easy. The two of you are hitting the right steps at the right time. So it's that flow that we get into. And so what leads us to that? What leads us to connection? Prioritizing it. I mean, it sounds really simple. It's harder to do in reality because we have a lot of things going on, but prioritizing connection. Even if I have a ton going on, I still want to prioritize connecting with my partner. I'm going to make sure that it happens, even if there's a lot of chaotic weeks. Then the second is resolving conflict and communicating productively. So arguments are really roadblocks to connection. So being able to work through those things clears up those roadblocks that could have been there. Also, just the process of communicating with each other makes us feel more connected if we're communicating well. If we're hearing each other out, if we're being vulnerable and we're trusting the other person be there for us, that in and of itself makes us feel connected, makes us feel more connected working through those difficult topics. And then lastly, continuing to do the little things that build up over time. So for example, every day we have a chance to make bids for connection. So for example, in the morning, there are some days where I'll make my spouse a cup of coffee in the morning. It's not a huge amount of time that I have to spend, but I know that one little thing will set the two of us up for a good day. It'll set our morning up to be positive, to be connected. Okay, so how can we reconnect? So if we find ourselves disconnected, how can we reconnect with each other? So the first step is recognizing that we're disconnected, as well as gauging the scope of it. So recognizing it, that's the first part, because you have to know what's going on to be able to be aware of it and to be able to do something of it. And then gauging the scope, that essentially means to be able to tell how deep the disconnect is. So if we've been disconnected for a week, that's going to look a lot different than if we've been disconnected for the past year. Then try to identify what factors are disrupting the connection. So is our relationship going well overall, but we're just not really spending a ton of time together, or we're around each other, but it's not engaged time where we're, again, engaged with each other, paying attention to each other, interested in each other? Is there resentment and or guards that we have built up from past events? Even if we're not fighting right now, are there things that we're carrying from the past that is making it hard to connect? And then lastly, are there frequent arguments? Are we both feeling upset, wanting to distance ourselves to be able to get away from the pain and hurt that the other person represents to us? And so after that, this is the hardest part, but try to communicate with each other through these issues. And so first, try not to problem solve right away. Just try to hear each other out. Oftentimes, when you're in a relationship, you want to problem solve right away because there's a problem. It's completely understandable, but oftentimes that gets us stuck because we have a completely different perspective, and therefore we have different solutions that we think would be best. So first, just try to hear each other out. Just try to get to know the other person's perspective a little bit better. And so again, it's not about figuring out who's right, who's wrong. It's not about placing blame. It's just about, let's figure out what's going on right now. And then when you're able to do that, when you feel heard by each other, when you feel understood, and that the other person really appreciates where you're coming from, that makes it so much easier to then problem solve. So what does that look like? Do we just need to incorporate a couple date nights a month and that'll do it? That'll make us feel connected? Do we need to work on the little things day to day? It could be a 5-minute conversation when we get home from the end of the day, instead of how's your day fine, how is yours fine, and then that being the end of it. Try to get a little bit more in depth. Maybe try to remember something that frustrated you about your day or that you really liked about your day. Try to share more with each other, even if it seems like those conversations wouldn't make a difference. One of those conversations, sure, not going to make much of a difference at all. But if every day for a year you have a quick conversation like that, that is definitely going to build up. And then for other couples, it's going to be working on your communication so that you can clear up some of the resentment, some of the guards that have been built up over time. And for couples where there are a lot of fights, communication is key, because if you can't communicate with each other, you're not going to be able to work on those things that are making the fights, making arguments. Then another part is think through all of these things together and expect it to be a difficult process. This is not easy. Even though we're told from the media, shows, movies, we're told that this is usually very easy to do. Like you just say one really nice apology and then everything is back to normal. That's just not reality. That's just not how it works. Staying connected takes conscious effort throughout the weeks and months and years. And the effort is often going to be out of your comfort zone. So for example, if my partner's love language is words of affirmation, I could put in the effort to make her feel cared for by expressing words of affirmation, by verbally telling her how much I care for her, or just having a conversation with her, even if that's out of my comfort zone. Maybe my comfort zone is physical touch, and that's very common for heterosexual couples. For the male, their love language to be physical touch, and for the woman, for their love language to be words of affirmation. So if mine, again, is physical touch, and I go out of my way to say to myself, she likes words of affirmation, I'm going to say some of those things. That's a really good thing to do. And so the cliche sentiment is oftentimes relationships are work. So you have to continue to work at them. I think that's an okay way to say it. But to me, the phrase that really hits home is relationships take consistent effort. To me, that's more true, and it carries much less of a negative connotation to work. And that's what staying connected is all about. It's continuing to put in that effort, like I said, throughout the years with each other. And again, to be able to communicate about it so that it doesn't feel like work. If the two of you are getting out of your comfort zone and you've been doing it for a while and it still feels like work, a lot of the times that signals that there's something off, and try to communicate with each other about that. All right, and so highlights, takeaways. So first, again, recognize if you're disconnected. So that's the first step. Then figure out why that is. Do this together collaboratively. Try to talk to each other about it, try to work together on it. And after you feel like the other person understands it, has an appreciation for your perspective, and vice versa, then you can move on to problem solving. Then problem solving, try to think of solutions together to that disconnect. And like I said, I'll emphasize it one more time. If you battle with each other, you're going to get nowhere. Both of you are going to get nowhere. So try to get on the same team against the problem of feeling disconnected instead of against each other feeling disconnected. So that is pretty much it. As always, if you're feeling disconnected and having a lot of trouble trying to find your way back to each other, couples therapy can be a tremendous resource. That's one of the most common themes that I work on with the couples that I work with, is that they're not having a bunch of fights, they're just disconnected, and how to get to a more connected and engaged, satisfying, fulfilled type of place in their relationship. So thank you for watching. My name is Ben King, and I will see you all next time.